This is the Weather Lounge here at Weatherworks.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us once again here in the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and our podcast comes to you from our Weatherworks home office located in beautiful Hackettstown, New Jersey. We are a private forecasting company, and our services stretch across the United States. And joining me, as always, here in the Weather Lounge is my dazzling co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, Brad. How are things? What's going on?
Not too bad. We're looking okay here. We're trying to get through this winter that seems to not want to let go now.
Yeah, that's true. But, today we're going to introduce another topic that we talked about before here on the Weather Lounge, and that is forensic meteorology.
Oh, wait. You know what? I don't recall a podcast about forensic meteorology, but wait.
Oh,
Oh, that was the one I was left out of. Oh, that's right. I wasn't invited to that one.
that is true. Yeah, sorry, Brad. We just had no room for you in that
I know.
podcast. No, we had in Sherilyn Patrick, and she was there talking about the forensic department, and so was Zach Chabala, one of our other meteorologists. And we just, with three people there, we felt if we added Brad in, he'd feel like almost
I
like a
know. It
third
would have been
wheel.
too much.
You know what I
I
mean?
know.
But
That's
anyway.
okay. It was a very good, informative podcast, though, about forensics. That's for sure. And we're just going to kind of elaborate now and take it a step further today.
Yeah. And that first podcast was all about, what we do with forensic meteorology. And then we also went through a bit of a case study to have almost like an idea of how things go down when it comes to, being in court and being on the stand with a meteorologist and what kind of questions are asked. And that's where our CEO, Frank Lombardo, got involved. And that was really great to have him on that episode. But Brad, let's invite in our new guest, huh?
Yeah, that'd be great. He's a integral part of the forensic team here at Weatherworks.
Yeah, and that is meteorologist Tommy Else. And I think I got your title wrong, Tommy. I know you're over there, so give us your true title.
Well, I don't know. It's changed 3 times over the course of my employment at Weatherworks. Let's see. I started off as staff meteorologist from
Okay.
97 to 2005, and then I was chief meteorologist for several years, and then recently now senior forensic meteorologist. So we're getting more creative on the titles.
That is true, but I mean, you've been one of the first hires, I believe, that Frank Lombardo added to Weatherworks, correct?
Yes, in fact, the odd story and ironic thing is I grew up listening to Frank Lombardo on the radio, WCTC.
WCTC.
Yep, and John Leo, Tony Salimo. Back in my day, prior to 1990, there was no Weather Channel. There was no internet. You had either their local news station or you had to tune into TV and follow the weather. But I was glued to 1450 WCTC, and I knew when Frank was going to be on, or John, or Tony, and I would even wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and put it on, and I had no idea it was being recorded. And I'm like, okay, good, it's still going to snow, or all right, we have rain coming on. But I actually contacted Frank Lombardo back when I was in college. This was right after the January 1996 blizzard, if you guys recall that, January 6th and 7th. And his first question was, okay, can you start tomorrow? And I said, wait a minute. I'm a junior. I start full-time classes in a couple of weeks. I said, there's no way. I said, well, actually, I'm looking to see if I can get an internship for the summer of 1996. And he goes, you know what? I don't know. I like to travel a lot with my family. Let me get back to you. But he eventually did. And so in May 96, I started working for Frank as an intern. I come up a couple days a week. I think we had to get over 120 hours to get credit. And I just was so gung ho about forecasting. That's all I wanted to do.
Did you cover that in the first month of internship, Tommy?
I actually did. Yeah, I think I actually went way over my time because I loved it so much. But one of the things that he introduced me to when because I always thought it was just, all right, I'm going to be on radio, I'm going to prepare forecasts for clients, and that's it. And then he says, no, we can't do that here. And I said, why not? He says, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You have to have something other than weather, because weather, there's not always going to be weather. There's going to be tranquil periods. I said, oh, okay. So what do you want me to do? He said, here, take a look at this. This is a past weather report. And he gave me one, and I'm like, I didn't say anything. I was like, I don't like this. I said, this is boring. I gotta reconstruct what the weather was for a particular time. Then I gotta, read all these depositions. And keep in mind, when you're reading some of these depositions
Hmm.
from the plaintiff's counsel or an expert, these are like sometimes 300 pages.
Mm.
And this is not like recreational reading of sci-fi or something like a TV guide. This is direct, intricate sometimes stuff. You have to constantly pay attention, write down details. And I remember I was like, I don't like this at all. He says, well, if you want to work here full time, um, after you graduate, this is one of the things that you're going to have to become good at. And so May '97, he hired me full time. And he knew I didn't really like forensic meteorology that much, but over the course of the next several years, especially when we hired Kevin Hopler full time and Sean Rowland full time, I started going more, besides forecasting, going more to the past weather reports.
I think what we really should cover is, I always get asked when I mention forensic meteorology, I always get asked, man, that sounds so interesting. Like, what exactly does that entail? Like, what do you guys do with that? So just give us a kind of a roundabout idea of what is forensic meteorology exactly.
I just tell people I work for NCIS. Uh, yeah, they're like, "Oh, really? Wow, you'd go to those all those cases?" No. Yeah, the best definition of forensic meteorology is the process of reconstructing the weather for a particular date, time, and period. And I always tell people a forecast is a prediction, but a forensic meteorology report, it already happened. So the media can't get involved. All the weather records are saved, and it's a big puzzle. So all you got to do is put the pieces of the puzzle together.
And I'll tell you, I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, and I did my first weather job on TV in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then moved down south, and I was, doing weather down there on TV for a long time. But I never, ever, ever thought about forensic meteorology. I didn't even know it existed till I moved back up here and started working at Weatherworks, and it's just something that you don't even think about. And I guess an easy way to describe it also, Tommy, is if everyone's seen car accidents, unfortunately, but a lot of times, like after the accident's been cleared, the road's still closed for an hour or two, and that's basically the same idea, right? They're reconstructing the accident, trying to piece together what happened, and that's kind of what you're doing, but at least on the weather side of things.
That's correct, because witness statements, video, photos can only tell you so much. You need to look
Right.
at the weather records to determine, exactly what happened. And believe it or not, you give me any location, any date and time, and I can reconstruct that weather. Because again, everything is archived, and all you got to do is just put the pieces of the puzzle together. And Brad, I know you just mentioned that you never even heard of forensic meteorology. I don't think when I was going to college, but I don't want to age myself, back in the '90s, there was no such thing as that in college. In fact, the American Meteorological Society had its first forensic workshop. Frank and I went there. It was back in 2012. So again, it's not something that's very well known across the U.S.
And you have a certification for this, correct? I mean, there's
Yes, I am certified by the American Meteorological Society as a certified consulting meteorologist. Myself and Frank are as well. And the last time I checked, there's only about 250 to 300 active across the whole United States. It's not very easy to get. It's a rigorous process where you have to have at least 5 years experience in the field. You have to say what your expertise is. I did forensic meteorology and forecasting, and then what they want you to do is hand in a paper based on your area of expertise of a real life case. And then they go over that. That's one of your qualifications. You have to have three references. And then they give you, based on your area of expertise, I think 15 to 19 real world example questions where you have to research them and answer them. Once you pass all that, then you go in front of a board of meteorologists, which consists pretty much all PhDs. you're sitting there in a horseshoe type desk. You're surrounded by everyone, and it's intimidating. Yeah, it's not very easy to get.
Wow. I mean, that's super entailed. Like I don't know. I mean, I know the AMS, does certifications on a lot of things. I imagine that might be really intricate on your knowledge of meteorology.
Especially when there's only a couple hundred across the country.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how it quite works because I know they do seals on broadcast meteorology too, right, Brad?
Yeah, they have an NWA and AMS seal. I never got either one of them. I was actually working towards my NWA one, but it's the same kind of thing. I mean, I don't. It's probably not even close to though what you have to do for become a forensic meteorologist and get certified for that.
But believe it or not, guys, there is no like if you want to be a forensic meteorologist in like the state of New Jersey, you don't have to get like a license or a real certification. There is no requirement. All you have to show is that you have extensive knowledge in the field that you're going to be an expert witness in, meaning how many years have you been in the field, how many cases have you gone to testify to and qualified as a weather expert witness. All those things come into play. And my first case that I went to court and testified to was, believe it or not, in Brooklyn. You talk about a ride. I had my truck back then. You remember how I had that Silverado truck, and I had to drive through New York to get there. And the first parking deck I see, and I'm like, I can't fit my truck in there. I'm going to come out with a convertible. So I had to that was like the hardest thing for me is find parking. I just remember that case back in 2009.
Well, luckily, I did testify too in court, but I didn't have to go to Brooklyn. I, I went to I think it was Somerville or Somerset or somewhere around there in New Jersey. So fortunately, I didn't have to worry about that parking situation at least.
That's my biggest concern is when I'm driving here to these places because you don't know where you're going to get traffic. You have to be at court at a certain time. These parking decks are sometimes filled up quick. Then you have to go on the street and find parking. I remember the one time in Philadelphia, I had to go to the Philadelphia courthouse and I had this thing mapped out perfectly. I'm like, look, there's a parking deck right there by the courthouse. Well, lo and behold, as soon as I got there, the road was closed. Uh, Yeah,
Perfect.
I actually ended up walking about a half mile or so to another parking deck, got the last spot, and just to give you an example of what the company gave me to drive there was a Dodge Caravan. Lo and behold, yeah, so I had to go and drive in a Caravan. I felt like a soccer mom. Uh,
Just stop off at the closest field and
yeah,
help the kids out.
So Tommy, WeatherWorks is like the middleman. I mean, where who hires WeatherWorks to do these forensic reports? I mean, is it both the insurance companies? Is it then also the clients that are trying to disprove something? I mean, where are we at in that process?
that's a good question. I do work with a lot of insurance companies like State Farm, Liberty Mutual, Greater New York, Nationwide. These insurance companies that hire us, we're working defense. Now, for plaintiff cases, it's
A lawyer,
attorneys
right?
that are the lawyers that hire us to do the cases. And sometimes I'm not even work with an insurance company on the defense side. It's another a defense attorney. So pretty much, I would just say attorneys to hire us. I'm either going to be working plaintiff or defense. And believe it or not, I actually average about 50-50 plaintiff and 50-50 defense cases.
I guess Mike, that kind of puts us. That kind of gives you an idea of what the certified snowfall totals are like too, because we're right in the middle. We're both working for the property managers and we're also working for the snow remover. So either way, we're just doing our job the way we think it, just like Tommy would. And again, he's not, like you said, he's 50-50 for lawyers and 50-50 for insurance companies.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, I mean, we have, you talked a little bit about your depositions and court appearances and stuff like that. I mean,
I can talk about some types of cases if you like.
we could.
The only ones that are yeah, because I'm sure there were a lot of them that were not safe for work though, Tommy.
I tell you, I've had some very interesting cases over many years. I've had some sad ones that hit you at home. I have had some funny ones, and I've had some very serious ones. But just to give an example of what type of reports I typically do, I would say about 70% of my cases deal with slip and falls on snow and ice. That's why winter is very important here. And last winter, good Lord, February, whew, just alone, February gave me plenty of reports for the next several years with all the snow. And this year, South Jersey, thankfully, Long Island snowed, so I'll get, a lot of reports. But up here in Northwest Jersey, we haven't had as much, but as long as we still have some cases. Now, besides slip and falls on snow and ice, believe it or not, I do slip and falls inside a store. Let's say it's raining out and the store doesn't have any mats down or wet floor signs, and someone walks in with rain on and wet shoes and walks on a tile floor, slips and falls. The plaintiff could hire me and say, "Hey, Mr. Else, how long was it raining for? Did they have notice it was raining?" Or I might be working defense in a case like that and say, "Hey, did my client take reasonable action to show that it was going to rain that day?" Um, some other cases, floods. Okay, some heavy rainfall reports. I've done, unfortunately, lightning strikes where I've done cases where someone got struck by lightning or a device got struck by lightning and need to show that there was thunderstorms in the area and it wasn't such a false claim. Wind damage, car accidents dealing with a light and sun glare, weight of snow on a roof. There was many winters where so much snow and ice builds up on the roof, you don't go up there and clear it, and that roof it gets so heavy and collapses. Then I'll work with an engineer to determine how much snow and ice was on the roof. Did it meet the engineering specs? So there's quite a few. But I would say the ones that hit me home the most are the ones that deal with very serious injuries of someone being paralyzed, or I've done death by auto before. Anything involving that or someone getting seriously hurt is the ones that kind of hit home. And you think about them for a while. You even if you're working the other side, you kind of want to. You're hoping to make a nice objective report to help both sides out.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that you pointed out all the different types of reports that we work on because it's not only dealing with the snow and ice at all. I remember one of the first reports that I worked on that wasn't dealing with snow and ice had to do with thunderstorm wind damage, and I guess a tree had fallen in a pool area, and I think somebody was actually injured from it. So that kind of is what you were talking about, Tommy. About people getting injured from you know the effects of thunderstorms and things like that.
Yeah, the one that hit me home, and I can't, I'm not going to reveal the exact location, but somewhere out in the Midwest, a couple of years ago, um, there was a camp, and during the middle of the night, a thunderstorm came, and a tree fell right on the cabin and killed the person. I mean, just think you're out in summer camp, and the last thing you're thinking about is a tree coming down and killing you. So I was hired to see if there was any warning for that thunderstorm, type of wind damage, or they even hired an arborist to see was the tree dead? Should have been removed prior to the storm. So that's, it's not only a meteorologist that gets involved in these cases, there are also other experts where, like, I can't opine to saying, hey, that tree should have been taken down, it was dead. That's not my area of expertise. And if I do something like that, then I can get in trouble. And actually, an attorney can say, I never want Mr. Else testifying again. You can get in trouble by going out of your area of expertise. So this is why sometimes in these cases, you're not alone. You work with an engineer because if you're doing a slip and fall case where the sidewalk was disheveled, it had a lot of, holes in it or cracks, and that could have contributed to the slip and fall. That's where the engineer comes in. Or if it was very sloped down where there was water that tended to pool there, an engineer would come to there. You could also have like a snow and ice liability expert. These are the people that remove snow and ice for a living, like in a plow truck. I'll work with them sometimes. I strictly deal with the weather and say, okay, this is where the storm was. This is when it began. This is where it ended. Then the snow and ice expert will come in and say, okay, here's the industry standards on what the defense should have done to remove the snow and ice from the sidewalk or incident location. So you have to be able to work with different experts and piece everything together.
So I know a few times, Tommy, you had mentioned about you've gone on site inspections for a case. And what does that actually entail? Like, what kind of information are you looking for? What are you gaining from that site inspection for your reports?
I remember one of the ones I went for. We had to show that if this location was on the north side of the building, or was it always open and exposed to sunlight? Because if it's on the north side of a building and it's shaded, the temperature in a shaded area will be colder than what the air temperature reflects. Also, a place that's shaded from the sun will tend to see the residual snow and ice cover linger on the ground longer. This is why you always look on one side of your house, you have snow cover, the other side is completely melted. So there's times where I have to go to like an exact site inspection because I can't tell from Google Earth Street View if it faces north, south, east, or west. I have to go there, find out what the elevation is, find out if it's exposed to sunlight, and that's one of the factors that I would have to do a site inspection for.
Yeah, I mean that really kind of brings more light into the fact that, hey, it's not just looking at these weather conditions, remotely. Sometimes we have to get out there in the field and find out what's going on.
Yeah, because that's too one of the questions I'll get on the stand from the other side, the opposing counsel is, were you at the site? Because if you say no, well, how do you know there was ice there? How do you know what it looks like? Have you ever been there before? That's one of the questions. And luckily with Google Earth, you have Street View. You also have bingmaps.com where they got Street View pictures. You can actually say, no, I've never been there, but here's some photos. This is exactly what the location looks like. So it helps me reconstruct the weather. But there are some attorneys that say, I don't care, charge me. Go down to the site, take a look at it. At least we know that you've been there.
Like my cousin Vinny, where you actually have to go in there and show the pictures
The
of
two Utes.
these two youths. But yeah, I would imagine. I mean, things. I mean, that's kind of well, that granted, that's a different whole idea, but I guess that's the kind of things you have to prove though and show that you've been there. And I think there's a picture of you somewhere on Weatherworks website of you measuring like a curb and I mean, what other kind of things would you have to actually do in the field other than
Oh, by the way, that picture of me measuring the curb, I had to go to that site and take my shoes off and go in the parking lot and show. I remember they were saying, "No, take your shoes off, go out into the parking lot." It was freezing cold because just to have like a certain, I needed it for a certain height for a measurement. Because one of the cases there, we had to show that the snow was under 2 inches, so the contractor didn't have to come out yet. So that was one of the cases that was pretty interesting to do. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely, but most of the time when I do a site inspection, it's pretty much going to be, does it get sunlight during the day? Because then the engineer will come and he's the one that's going to talk about the slope. Yes, it has a downward slope. That's where water tends to pool. They should have paid attention to that area more. That's more his area. And they'll come with a level and they'll see what the degree slope is. So.
I guess I was gonna say, so I guess them hiring WeatherWorks, for whatever our charge is, a couple $100 or per hour versus the case could be worth. I mean, what was like the highest amount of? I mean, can you talk about that? Like, what was the richest case basically that you've ever been a part of?
$10 million lawsuit.
Jesus.
Yeah, person was permanently injured. $10 million lawsuit. Frank had ones for several million with a lightning strike. Yeah, they get up there depending on how severe the injuries are. In fact, some of the times the plaintiff has such a high demand because of all the medical expenses that the victim has to pay out, and they don't settle because of that. So then it goes to court, and then it's up to a jury to decide how much money does the plaintiff get. So I got one case now where it's still not going to settle because of all the doctor bills that the plaintiff has incurred, and so it's going to go to court.
That's interesting that you said about settling, because I remember the first case that I went to court on. Everybody kept telling me, "Oh, they'll settle. Oh, they'll settle. No problem. Oh, they'll settle." Yeah, and then days are clicking by and nobody's settling, and I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm going to court."
Yeah, it's a good. Most of the time, these cases do settle. I'll go to court a couple times a year. Now with COVID, I've actually gone a few cases where we did it by Zoom. or a Microsoft team meeting because no one's allowed in the courtroom. But there's such a backlog right now because of COVID. But going back to how many cases I do a year, go to court, maybe 3, 4, 5. That's about it because again, most of these cases settle. In fact, one case I had everything planned. It took me about 2 hours to get to this place in Nassau County. And right as I get there, my attorney comes up to me and says, "We're in settlement talks." And I'm like, "Oh, I just drove." But the company policy is once I leave, they get
The
charged a full
charge,
day.
yeah. What's like the statute of limitations? Like how far back can somebody say, "Oh, I slipped on ice 20 years ago. I want to sue now," or I have this injury that just hasn't gone away 10 years ago, and now I think it's because I slipped and fell on ice.
Yeah, I don't know what the statute of limitation is. Sherilyn, the director, knows that more, or an attorney, but I think it's at least a couple of years because then after that, once that passes, you can't go and say you slipped and fell or sued for something. But I do have cases that are still back in 2015, 2016. They keep lingering. They haven't settled yet because of court. But I think there's a statute of limitation where you can only certain amount of years goes by. Yeah, you can't go and say, oh yeah, I remember that day I slipped and fell and get an attorney.
Tommy, if you're in court, like, just curious, you were mentioning about the lawyers maybe questioning you about, well, how do you know what was there? Like, how do you know you weren't at the site at that time? How can you possibly know if there was snow or ice on the ground? How do you answer that type of question when it presents itself?
It depends on the type of during discovery. That's everything's discoverable to both sides that they have to share the information, and that means like photos of the incident scene taken at the time of the incident, a police report, an ambulance report, a witness, video surveillance. Those are the cases that are a little bit easier when you have photos that are taken right at the time of the scene because they're time stamped. You have a date. And what I do is I take that, then I take the weather records, and a combination of both of them makes for a very strong case if there was snow and ice there. Say, hey, look, the weather records show it's there, and here we got a picture that states, look at it. There's 2 3 inches of snow and ice on the ground. Okay, that's from this storm only. There's also cases where there are no photos, there are no witnesses, and all you have is the weather record. So when I testify, I'll say, it's my meteorological expert opinion based on the data alone. This is what the conditions were. And then they'll say, are you sure about that? I said, yeah. I mean, based on the data, there's no supporting documentation of testimony besides what plaintiff said. And this is all I can do. And they say, okay, thanks for your time. This is all, just so the jury knows that, sometimes all you have is the weather records.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's good to know. I was curious about that. I remember I was asked a similar question when I did testify, and I was trying to think back on how I answered that question, but I figured, well, Tommy's here, he could do
Well, I
that
remember the
now.
one time the attorney asked me, and I learned this is many years ago when I first started. Um, I said, well, because plaintiff testified to it. Nope, Mr. Ellis, you can't say that. You have to show with a reasonable doubt. Um, what are you using? You can't just say plaintiff testified to that because anyone can say, oh, yeah, he slipped and fell on ice. No, show me what you're doing. Do you have photos? Do you have video? Do you have witnesses? Do you have data to support it? You just can't say plaintiff testified to it. That's not going to fly.
So where's I mean I know the National Weather Service has tons and tons of observations, and I mean, is there a secret to where you would actually find all the previous data on a certain date? I mean, what's your process of going back to to a certain day and to a certain hour and even a minute?
Well, all the data from the National Weather Service, and that includes the surface observations from the airports, the storm spotter reports, the forecasts, the advisories, the radar images, satellite images, all that's stored and archived at the National Center for Environmental Information in North Carolina. And so they give meteorologists like myself a direct link where you can download the data for free. And I tell you, back in the day, before this um, would even happen, Frank and I would have to call beforehand was called the National Climatic Data Center. We'd have to call and speak to someone and order the data and then wait for the data to arrive by mail. Several years ago, everything now is online. So now this is why sometimes I can crank out these reports pretty quickly because the data is at my disposal real quick. And that's what's great now for meteorologists is I look at the data, I can look on it on the fly right there, save it to my computer and go. Now, there is a thing where you need the data you're looking at to be certified. And in a case like that, I always say that's the government's way of making money because the certified data is the exact same data I'm looking at. I just can't put that what's called the blue ribbon of seal on it. And all that is just the custodian of records from the National Center for Environmental Information prints out the data, signs it, doesn't look it over, nothing, and they charge like $200-300 for that data alone.
Yeah, that is quite interesting. Like, you know, the, I think people when they see certified data from wherever it may come from, not necessarily WeatherWorks, but at WeatherWorks we have somebody quality controlling, looking things over, like with our certified snowfall totals. But in this instance, you're just getting somebody basically just putting a stamp on it and sending exactly what they have.
Right. And it's the exact stuff that we're looking at online. A meteorologist like myself, I know what the data looks like. I know where there's errors, but the custodian of records ain't going to do that. And just to give you an example, too, God forbid you have a case that deals with radar. Each radar image is $27 to be certified. So just think there's sometimes 12 images per hour. Imagine looking at something that's several days worth of radar. The client will be broke. So you got to pick and choose sometimes.
Well, I think we covered that pretty extensively, but maybe we should get into some of these odd cases that you might have done that might be more interesting to somebody out there who's just like, all right, let's hear some crazy stuff this guy's
As
dealt
long
with.
as you don't get in trouble, Tom. We won't get you in trouble
Yeah,
on
no,
this.
yeah, some of these cases are already settled, but I remember one of the scariest ones one time is I had to represent someone in prison. And I'm just like, I just want to let you all know on the record that I believe you're all innocent. But there's a guy, I'm not going to mention the courthouse or where it took place or where the prison was, but I had to represent someone that slipped and fell in the yard, and they hired me to see what the weather was if they'd have been in the yard that day. They actually showed the video of the person falling and injuring themselves. And I just remember saying, "Oh, I hope the data is favorable for them. This guy's going to come out and find me one of these days." That was one of the scarier cases. The other case I had was with a DUI, and I'm working defense in this case, and the attorney calls me and says, "Yeah, my client got stopped for a DUI. She's innocent. The officer said she was drinking because her cheeks were flush, but I think her cheeks were flush because the window was down and it was in the 50s, and it was windy that day. So all I need you to do is say, what the temperature was, what the wind conditions were, and then I'll take it from there." So I'm like. I had no idea what her blood alcohol content was or what the breathalyzers tested. They just wanted me to stick with the weather, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
All right, and you're not doing anything wrong. You're just actually testifying the actual weather conditions, whether or not right. You're just telling them what the weather was, and then if they want to go on their own tangents with all that, I guess that's out of your control, right?
Yeah, the one Frank did with a married couple is, the wife said that every now and then the husband would come home, his hair was all disheveled, and he kept blaming it on the weather. And so Frank had to go and reconstruct the weather. In the days that she said his hair was all disheveled, the wind was calm those days, and so she showed that he was cheating on her. Oh yeah, that was an interesting case. Um, so make sure if you get caught, make sure you have a hat on or you should comb your hair beforehand. I would say
Oh
that those
my.
were some of the more fun ones I had, but the serious ones. Again, I'll tell you, the ones I fear the most of doing all these cases, it's not the slip and fall cases, it's trees coming down. Because I've done cases where a tree comes down in a house, you're asleep, you're dead. Or you're driving and a tree comes down, lands on your car. What are you going to do? there's nothing you can do.
Wrong
You
place,
can't
wrong
get out of
time,
the way.
unfortunately.
Honestly, that just happened to one of my wife's friends. With one of the windstorms we just had, they were driving along and a tree branch came down and it broke through their windshield of the car. And luckily, everybody was okay, just some scratches and things like that. But I
Yeah,
mean,
people don't realize like you have a big limb that comes down, or even a whole tree itself. There's nothing you can do. It's gonna go right through your house. It's gonna go right through your car. And I've done so. Those cases to me are the ones where as soon as I see it, I'm like, oh, someone died or someone got seriously hurt. Yeah, those are the ones that hit home. I've done some car accidents where, you know, it's sun glare and someone hit someone. They didn't see him crossing a street. Those, hit home as well. Also had one too dealing with they wanted to rule out any weather where someone was heavily intoxicated driving and they wanted to show that the weather wasn't involved. He wrapped his car around a tree. It's like those you read and uh or the incidents on the turnpike or the parkway where a fatality occurred where someone got struck. And I hats off to those first responders and the police that deal with those cases, because I'd be haunted for months seeing stuff like that. I'm like, so I tell them, they're like, we got photos. I'm like, don't send me any photos.
yeah.
I'll just stick with the weather. I don't want to look at any of that stuff. So yeah, those are the ones, guys, that hit me at home pretty hard.
A couple weeks ago, we had a case, or not a we had snow squalls come through a couple Saturdays ago. Have you ever dealt with snow squalls? I mean, accidents, because those are you hear about these chain reactions almost every year. There's somewhere, and actually, not much happened with this past one. There was a bad accident on Route 81 out towards like Hazleton in Pennsylvania with these snow squalls a couple Saturdays ago. But have you ever dealt with these before in any other case?
Yeah, you've seen them online, like the chain reaction ones in PA or Ohio, where they cause multiple car accidents and backups. No, I have not dealt with anything like that. Um, I don't know if I ever dealt with something where snow squall actually was the thing that caused it. Luckily, I don't. Yeah, those are the ones that are very significant. I haven't not luckily have not had to deal with something like that.
I just still, I still have to think about these different. I mean, sun glare is another one. I've never even thought about that. I mean, it happens to everybody. You've been blinded and you can't see, until you get past a shady part or something. And who knows if a car jumps in front of you, within a quarter of a mile that you can't see.
Well, take a look when you're driving at night. Right? Think about when you're driving at night when someone crosses the street. I can't see them, right? Especially if they have dark colored clothing on and there's no street lights. How do you see? It's very hard. Oh, he was in a crosswalk. Well, how do you see that? And there's cases where I get where it's like, if some people don't have their headlights on and it's sunset, they use me for that to say, okay, um, because there's three different types of twilight that occur once the sun sets. You have civil twilight where you can still do things, you know, without artificial lighting, and then you have nautical twilight. Then you have astronomical twilight. There's a certain amount of lighting still present during these twilights, but I mean, just think about when you're driving and someone crosses the street. How do you see? You can't even see them sometimes. But that's where the lighting cases I will do some of those cases where the pedestrian's crossing, someone didn't have their headlights on, and boom, hits them.
And this has been a great talk so far. I mean, I hope people, really get a sense for what actually forensic meteorologists are doing, because it's not just, you know, those slip and fall accidents. There's so much more to it and so much that you have to look into.
Well, I had an attorney the other day, one of my last testimonies. In fact, the office was listening to it because it was made publicly available. Where one of the attorneys says, "You're a meteorologist. You guys can't even get a forecast right for several days." And I said, "Well, I had to stop him right there." And I said, "Well, there's a big difference. A forecast is a prediction. A fast weather report, it already happened. Everything's archived. All I got to do is put the pieces of the puzzle together, and there it is." And people, they confuse those two. And I keep telling them, listen, the media is not involved. There's no hype, nothing. This is it. This is what happened. Here it is. It doesn't matter what warnings or advisories are out. These are the conditions.
It's what can be proven by you with what facts are available, and that's it.
Does the forecast, Tommy, does the forecast ever come into play during any kind of a testimony? I mean, do they ever say, well, the forecast had this, but then this happened, and my plaintiff, or he wasn't prepared, or they weren't expecting this?
Yeah, there's cases where if I'm working plaintiff, for instance, and the forecast, several days out had, snow in the forecast, and then an advisory came out or winter storm warning, I'll use that because in case the defense says, hey, there was no notice, this thing came out of nowhere, and then I'll come in and say, here's his own forecast, here's the advisories. This was issued well in advance. It was something that was well forecast. Now, I've had other cases where I'm working defense and the Weather Service didn't put an advisory out until the event was over because it was one of those hit or miss events. So it's happened to me both times where I've worked with plaintiff and it was well advertised, well forecast, and there was other times I worked defense and the Weather Service had a poor forecast or it wasn't something that it just was very isolated and came out of nowhere and they didn't put the advisory out or a special weather statement out until it was after the incident happened.
Now you have to use the Weather Service because, again, we have our own private forecasting services for our own clients, and sometimes they're not the same as the Weather Service forecast. But I guess you have to use them because it's a government agency.
That's correct. The National Weather Service is the only government entity that can produce a forecast. They're under the Department of Commerce, and those forecasts are the only ones that are archived. I can't say, hey, like a private company like Weatherworks or AccuWeather or any other of the big companies out there, the Weather Channel, we can't say, okay, winter storm warnings in effect. We can't do that. We cannot issue an advisory, a watch, or warning. That's where the National Weather Service comes in, and that's where we have to access and archive those forecasts to show what was going on.
Yeah, now granted, we will send to our clients and say that, hey, here's a storm alert for the upcoming event of 4 to 8 inches and all that kind of stuff. But, what Tommy is getting at is just that.
We need documentation, right, from a.
Yeah, I can't say, hey, my phone app said,
Yeah.
3 to 6 inches. This is what I was following. That's where again you have to, because the National Weather Service's own forecast, the watches, warnings, advisories, they're teletyped across the TV, they're on the radio, they're everywhere. I've had some cases where they say, yeah, I was using my phone app. Okay, what did your phone app say? I don't know. I don't have it.
It changed too many times since the
Yeah.
last couple of hours.
And you don't have access to that, so you can't use that in a court of law.
Well, hey, I mean, man, I think this has been a really great talk about forensic meteorology. Brad, I don't know if you have any other last minute questions, but I think we covered most of our session.
I got one for you guys.
Oh, he's got one
And
more. Okay.
yeah, the reason why I like forensic meteorology is because I love solving problems. You're playing detective. You have to figure out what happened. And I really love cases where I go against another expert and then it's you versus the expert. Your data versus his data. Your findings versus his findings. Who can present the data the best? And there's times I go up against someone, wow, they're very good. And I got other times I go up against someone who's not a meteorologist and kind of opines to that. It goes
You blow
both
them out of the
ways.
water,
But
basically.
yeah, but I really, this is why I love problem solving. It's problem solving. You're playing detective. You have to figure out what happened.
I would imagine you have to have all your bases covered anyway going into the court, because I think what you said earlier, the plaintiff's testimony isn't, that's just what they're, you still have to prove everything, and then you probably have to have everything covered before you even take that stand.
Yeah, when you're on the stand, you better be on your A game because you have some attorneys that ask some very intricate and tricky questions one time, then they'll word the question just a little differently down the road. And if you answer that question different, you're done. So you always have to pay attention to and you only answer what they ask you. Because if you start blobbing, blah, 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 going off on tangents, they know they got you. You just answer only to what they ask. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember with the case I testified on, they presented data to me, and they called it a co-op station. And I looked at it and I go, well, there's no co-op station in the state of New Jersey with this name. And right there, I boom had him.
You had them right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, you also
So,
get the ones where, remember, the co-op stations report 7 a.m. in the morning. So it's a 24-hour lag. And the guy's like, look, 7 a.m. right here. It says 4 inches of snow fell. No, that's 7 a.m. from the previous day to 7 a.m. today. So you get the ones where they misconstrue or totally don't analyze the weather data correctly, and you have to explain it to them.
and it was also funny too, because after I said there's no co-op station with this name, so I don't know where this was produced, and then I said also there's a, a hole punch through the date. So in whatever they handed me, I was like, so I have no idea what date this might be for. Uh, so that was the one thing I do remember for the case I did go to.
Yeah, there's times too where your attorney may throw you under the bus, where they don't tell you or give you all the data that was disclosed, and then they're like, "So, did you see this happen in Discovery?" And I'm like, "This is one of those times you want to stick a Twix in your mouth." Um, and hope there's a power outage or something. But there's times too where your attorney can not give you all the pieces of information, and then you're just like, "Oh, geez."
But hey, Tommy, I think that about wraps it up. So I really thank you for coming on to the podcast here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tommy.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And anytime you have a slip and fall, make sure you take pictures. But I
Yeah,
won't be able to represent you. It's a conflict of interest.
yeah, especially at our company. Sorry, that won't work out. But thank you for coming out and being on the podcast. It was great. I'm hoping all of our listeners out there really got a good sense of what forensic meteorology really is. But anyway, that's it for our podcast for this week. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. As always, find Weatherworks on social media and come back in 2 weeks. We'll have a new episode right here on the Weather Lounge.